introductions. So Toby, you want to let me know when we're live.
You are all set.
Thank you. Toby, you want to let me know. So good evening, everyone. It's nice to see you all here, even though this is not perhaps the desired choice for a meeting like this. Hopefully it will be a reasonable substitute. For those of you who I have not had the pleasure of officially meeting or working with on a one-to-one basis, it's nice to see you here. Again, my name is Steve Plank. As you know, I serve as your superintendent. You will meet here tonight shortly Bob Butler from the Wisconsin Association of School Boards. Bob, if you want to wave, we'll do a more thorough introduction later. So hopefully people could see Bob out of the corner of their eye. We'll certainly introduce him a little bit more in a bit. But as we get going here tonight, just a couple of kind of more housekeeping-ish reminders. As we meet in this virtual space, I do want to ask that to the extent possible, when you're not planning to be talking, if you could just keep yourself muted, that helps keep all the echo and weird extraneous noise to a minimum, as we all have learned in the last year. Also, we are live streaming this, so it's being recorded. So we have an unknown number of listeners and or observers who maybe colleagues of ours just want to listen in, or who could be community members or whomever, because this is essentially a subcommittee of group of people that is put together from the board. So just so that you know, we are live streaming this tonight. So people are watching, whatever that may mean in terms of our own behavior and etiquette, just as a reminder for you there as well. Other than that, I wanted to just mention before we get into some introductions, essentially what we'll do with the next 2 hours or just shy of 2 hours of time. And that is that, we've wanted to get this kicked off in terms of us meeting as a group. As you know, this was tonight was not originally intended to be our first meeting. As Bob and I talked and prepared, we started to really realize that there might be good reason, just given the nature of where we're at with the state and the fiscal realities of a budget being hammered out by the legislature and the governor's office, that perhaps it would be wise for us to pause just a little bit or slow down a touch until we had some more information. In addition to that, though, we also recognize the urgency and the importance of us coming together to talk about compensation and how we best move forward. So as you look around, the screen and we work together tonight, you'll see as we get into the introductions, we do have 3 of our board members here. They're certainly, an important voice in all of this. You have myself and Connie and Ruth, as well as a principal from each level here. So you'll see that. And then, of course, you've probably noted in the compensation committee makeup, really tried to cover a balance of people from all different areas of curriculum, from all different levels of experience and tenure in public education, to try to bring as vast and varied a voice to the table as possible. And as we move forward then tonight, we'll get into some introductions here momentarily, and then really want to get into an overview of the process. Why are we here? What is this all going to look like and be about? What's potentially a time schedule? What are some of the things we'll talk about and do? And then Bob's going to present really kind of an overview of some alternative compensation systems and some of the reasons really to kind of delve into this and why we would get into this conversation and now, and what are some of those priorities. Then we'd really want to make sure that we talk about next steps, plan a follow-up meeting. And one of the things that you'll hear through the conversation tonight as we talk is the desire to build a survey. And so the timing of that's going to be really critical so that we can get feedback from all of our colleagues, knowing that this is really just a small representative group. So with that, I would just kind of like us to just go around the horn. And I think what seems to work best in this environment is if I call on folks, because I'll just make my way then through the screen. And as we're doing that, it would be helpful if you'd, let us know your name, where it is you're teaching or what you're teaching, and maybe just a little bit of insight into where you are in your career. Hey, this is my second year teaching. I'm pretty early on in this, and so I have a vested interest. Or, hey, I'm just a couple of years potentially from retiring, and while excited about that, I also want to make sure that compensation is moving forward in a way that makes sense for everyone. And so it may be where you are in your career or what your interest level in serving on this committee was. Sometimes I know that groups like this is thankless work, that you're rolling up your sleeves and spending a lot of time that others aren't. And so your involvement, of course, is critical. And so with that, we'll just kind of make our way around the horn here. So go ahead and unmute yourself when I call on you and just give us that little bit of an introduction. And we'll start with Jack Schmidt.
Hi, I'm Jack Schmidt, Karcher Middle School. I'm in my 15th year of teaching, all of which has been at BASD. And I kind of feel like I'm smack dab in the middle of my career and kind of now settled down and made roots in Burlington. And I, not just looking at compensation for me moving forward, but other people to have that same opportunity I did 15 years ago.
Awesome. Thanks, Jack. Craig.
Hi, I'm Craig Weinkoff. I am a 5th grade teacher at Dyer. This is my 7th year teaching, and kind of like Jack, I'm 7 years. I'm kind of getting into the years where I'm really focused on bettering myself as a teacher and just kind of looking for ways to be involved in the Burlington community. And this is one way that I'm trying to get involved. So.
Awesome. Heather.
Hi, I'm Heather Milkey. I teach math and intervention programming at Burlington High School. And this is my 19th year teaching. So I guess I'm just past that halfway mark at this point in time. And I think that's part of why I joined the committee, because I kind of feel like I'm starting to look towards that retirement endpoint, but I also know what it was like to be that beginning teacher because I'm kind of right in that middle. So I want to make sure that we're looking at everybody in the scope of things and not just one end or the other.
Taylor.
Taylor Wishaw, board member. I'm just here to absorb as much as I can and hear from everyone and digest, because you as educators, I want to hear your opinion, and you're a vital part of the process. So thank you for all you do.
I'm going around my screen, Toby, and if you're still sitting at your desk, you'll be in all these meetings, and so I think it'd be helpful for you to do a quick intro of yourself as well.
Gee, thanks. I'm Toby Green. Most of you know me as the person who sends out the crazy emails with regards to our open positions. But yes, I'll be joining in these meetings as well, making sure that they run smoothly. So if you need any assistance, send me a chat. Thank you.
Thanks, Toby. And really, I did want people to know too, she's the brains of the operation behind the scenes, making sure all of our technology works. And so please do reach out if we're in need of some technical advice or support. Ruth.
Hi, I'm Ruth Shenning, the business manager. This is my 9th year here. So while I know we're having a different lens, maybe with this group, I am getting to the point where I am also starting to look toward retirement, but also want to make sure that we have a solution that's going to work for everybody. So.
And Penny.
Hi, I'm Penny Yaki, high school choral director in general music and advisor for National Honor Society. And this is my 34th year in education. So getting closer to retirement, I hope. Just interested in working on the committee because I think I've been involved in many, many different groups and activities over the years. And I think I can provide some insight into the experience and how many hours it takes to do that and trying to work something across the board so everyone benefits from it.
Thank you. Catherine.
Hi there. I'm Catherine Meyer. I teach third grade at Lions Center. It's my 12th year teaching, and I've been in Burlington for 4 years. I guess I feel like I'm forever away from retiring. My interest in this is more of like a system and seeing how we can attract and retain the best teachers possible, for a few different reasons. But one of them is my family's here and my kids will be going through the schools and everything. And I want to make sure that this is a place that teachers want to be.
Excellent. Jackie.
Hi, my name is Jackie Science, principal at Cooper. This is my 30th year in education, my 8th year here in BASD, serving as principal in some capacity. And I am very interested in, I like a lot of your ideas, finding a solution to our pay scale and how we can best meet the needs of all of our staffs and teachers, and ensure that there is retainment of our teachers, and that's probably the biggest thing.
Okay. How about Brianna?
Hi, I'm Brianna Harris. I teach 7th grade special ed at Karcher. This is my 5th year teaching overall. I am very, very close to finishing my master's degree. So that'll be interesting to look into as we talk about compensation. And I'm just interested in a lot with what Catherine said and looking at retainment and how we can make that attractive, but also sustainable for Burlington.
Thank you. Chris.
My name is Chris Pointer. I'm a school counselor at Burlington High School. This is my fourth year at the high school and at in my career. So starting out still and just finally feeling like I'm getting my footing and looking to see what the future might hold as far as compensation goes.
Awesome. Diane.
I'm Diane Wood. I'm on the school board, and I'm also on the personnel committee. So that was one reason why I wanted to be involved in this discussion. I am retired after 37 years of teaching. The last 17 were in Kenosha. And part of what I want to do is to be involved in something like this because it's a chance to pay it forward. My 3 kids had wonderful educations. There are some familiar faces out here, and I just would like to be involved, see what we can do as a board and as a community. Thank you.
Connie.
I'm Connie Zinnan. I'm the assistant superintendent. This is my 35th year with the district. And I think, I echo what people say and have said in terms of just, finding a sustainable model that really, meets the needs of all staff, regardless of where they are, in their journey of education, and to be able to attract and retain, the best possible teachers. So I have confidence that this committee can certainly come up with something and work together to do that. Thanks.
Jill.
Yep, Jill Oschlager here, currently serving as middle school principal. It's my 17th year in education. I echo everything everyone is saying. I think the 3 things we have to focus on is how do we attract quality educators? How do we sustain keeping them? And how do we sustain ensuring that we can also financially afford it at the same time?
I'm also noticing I use people's full formal names because that's how I tend to write people's names. But if you want the shortened version of your name, like I go with Steve, not Stefan. If you start calling me Stefan, I'll think my mom's yelling at me. And I'm thinking that as I'm going to call out Elizabeth, which I think typically you do go by Liz, if I'm correct.
I actually go by Beth, but yes, so no worries. happens all the time. So my name is Beth Lamper, and I am a first-year teacher. It's my first year teaching ever, anywhere. And I wanted to join this committee because I wanted to become more involved in the Burlington School District. And I also wanted to become more of a self-advocate for myself and an advocate for other teachers while exploring the world of education outside of the classroom.
See, I knew there was something about your name that I wasn't getting quite right. It's Beth. So I got that now. Thank you. Dana.
I'm Dana Friend, and I currently teach at Waller, but I will be moving to Dyer next year. And I've been teaching for 16 years in the district, and I had a year outside of the district. And I think the reason that I'm here is kind of echoing what everyone else said, is just being involved with something and giving back and putting in some hours into a committee that is going to benefit everyone.
Peter.
I am Peter Turk. I'm on the board, and I'm a parent of 4 kids, 2 graduates of the Burlington School District, 2 are hopeful graduates. It's fun to see the number of familiar faces and a wide spectrum of people, our staff members on this committee, and I think I'm looking forward to getting valuable insights from everybody.
Deb.
Hi, my name is Deb Frash, and I am a speech pathologist in the district. I've been working here for 20 years, and I was thinking about it earlier, and I think I've worked in every building except for Dyer and Winkler over the course of my career. And I wanted to be on the committee because I felt that we needed OTs, PTs, and speech therapists needed a voice, just because we're kind of a different, what we do is different than what teachers do. And so we have other things that we need to be looking at as far as that. So I'm very interested and excited to be working with everyone.
Eric.
Hi, I'm Eric Burling. I serve as principal at Burlington High School. I've been in education for 33 years, 30 here at Burlington Area School District, and I've had the pleasure of being able to grow within an organization. I was a longtime teacher and coach, club advisor, activities director, then assistant principal, and the last, I believe, 9 or 10 years, I've had the opportunity to work with Burlington High School in the capacity of principal. So I've seen what it takes. We're a people business, and we need to attract and retain quality people. And again, I think I've seen many lenses of how the compensation model could be effective for us to do that. And I look forward to, with the diversity we have here of age and experience, to get those views so we can best support our staff to do a great job for our kids.
Thank you. Julie Beth.
Hi, Julie Beth Favre. I've been teaching for 28 years, but this is my first year in Burlington. And the district that I came from was on the step and lane model, and then moved to, you know, kind of a different type of thing. And now I'm back into the step and lane for the moment. And so I thought I could bring that perspective to the committee, what it was like to move into an alternative pay schedule.
Okay. Josh.
Josh Dow, social studies teacher at Burlington High School, and at-risk teacher as well. I also serve as the BA president. I have been part of maintaining the previous salary schedule for the past 20 years in the district. So I'll be curious how this works out to make sure that we can look at things like steps and educational enhancement, along with retention and things of that nature.
Thank you, Josh. Jennifer.
Hi, I'm Jen. I teach at Cooper. This is my 6th year teaching 3rd grade. I think a big interest for me is I just completed my master's last year, and so I would love to call Burlington my like forever school. And I think I represent that party of people of wanting to make Burlington their career, lifelong, 30 years in. So yeah, really interested in where this goes, and hopefully we'll all work together and it will turn out well.
Awesome. Thanks, Jen. And Julie.
Hi there. Sorry about that. I am 21st year of teaching in high school English, and I've also worn many hats too, as far as being a coach and a club advisor. And I am also interested in not just because I'm not quite close enough to consider retirement, but certainly more than halfway through, and being a community member that's planning on living in Burlington as well, would like to look at all levels of the teaching and compensation. So,
Awesome. And I do want to thank both Julie and Jen for being here. They're on our kind of alternate list of folks, and really do appreciate the fact that they're here and sitting in as well. And also would like to just point out, after Josh's introduction of serving as the president of the Burlington Education Association, that nothing we're doing here is intended to supplant the work of the BEA or the way that the BEA negotiates with the school district. So I think people know that, but sometimes I think it's good to just say that out loud. As we've done, our introductions here, I'm reminded too that, the idea that you all come to the table, that everyone here is very interested in a conversation about how we develop a model that will serve everyone. And that is part of the goal for sure. I think for tonight in particular, and as we get started, I think part of the goal too is to kind of talk about process and to think about how we build trust so that we can have what is likely to be at times probably a pretty tough conversation relative to how do we all get most of what we want? Where do we compromise? What does it look like? What are the things we value? And how do we compensate people in a way that does address the idea that we want to attract and retain the very best? And so one of the things you'll hear Bob talk about as we shift gears is kind of the cost of doing business. And we're not going to get deep into money tonight because money tends to derail conversations, right, in the thought process. But we will at some point, be having to really explore, what are the cost realities of what we're doing. But what you'll see is kind of everything is tied to a cost, no doubt. So before we do kind of our next piece of just like what's going to be process-wise, Bob, would you go ahead then and introduce yourself to the group and share all the wonderful wisdom that you bring to the table?
Well, thank you, Steve, for the opportunity and that kind introduction. I'm Bob Butler, a staff counsel and associate executive director with the School Board Association. I've been there for 31 years, and I've worked with a number of school districts over that time period in compensation. So for the first 20 plus, a lot of teacher negotiations, and for the last 10, assisting school districts in their formulation of alternative compensation systems while being respectful and continuing on with the negotiations with those bargaining units that continue to negotiate. Many times in this process, I will be asked, well, what should we do? And I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'll just be blunt about that. Or they've asked, well, what's a good pay system? What does a good pay system look like? And the best pay systems are those that are created locally, and they're created organically. So you may see some things that you like in a different pay plan, a different part of the state. You might like things that are incumbent in your existing plan, and that's all good. But in going through this, the main thing is that you have the opportunity to put your viewpoints out there, and they can be vetted and articulated in a very respectful manner. Because there's right and wrong answers with what the law requires. There might be right and wrong answers from a standpoint of what you can afford. And as Steve said, that's something that's going to be discussed further down the road. But the main thing for this evening is to try to get an overview of what the process will look like. And I don't think we're going to get to the point of actually having the principles of the committee hardened out, and some brief conversation and going through some presentation materials on what compensation systems can look like. But it's all really process oriented at this point. And part of that process piece will be setting up a calendar for the future, and then soliciting input not only from yourselves, but from your colleagues. So one of the things that we will discuss briefly tonight, and then our next meeting we'll dive into in great detail, is creating a compensation survey which can be sent out to the staff to get ideas of things that they value, things you like in the existing plan, things that you think are missing in the existing compensation system. But all that is information gathering for creating data that you can use as a committee to come up with a recommendation to deliver to the board as a whole. And as Steve said, while those recommendations come forward, we're obviously very respectful and understanding of the role that the Education Association plays in negotiating over base wages. So our work hopefully is a parallel in that conversation. It's not exclusive to, or it's not overriding those legal responsibilities.
Thank you, Bob. And I do want to share, and this is a little bit of a sideways compliment perhaps to Bob, but I want to point out the fact that, potentially you hear that he is part of the Wisconsin Association of School Boards, and that potentially that means, he comes to us with kind of a school board bias, for example. And I just want to point out that that couldn't be further from the truth. Bob is just a go-to person for lots of folks right now because of his really deep and intimate experience in helping school districts look at compensation, and because he knows the law on compensation so incredibly well that he becomes somebody that can answer just about any question we could throw at him. But the other part about that, and Bob alluded to this, is he really comes with no opinion. Even in our conversations to sort of prepare and kind of ask about, how we maybe go about setting this up to have a healthy and active, engaged conversation. He does a very, very good job of staying just, far enough away from the conversation to say, well, it's going to all depend. It doesn't come with any preconceived ideas of how this is going to go. And so I think that that's a wonderful compliment to Bob as sort of a lead expert in this conversation for us. So I want to thank him for that. And then, certainly review the idea that we are in a time where there's no doubt that there's some concern about sort of the fiscal realities that we're faced with. And I think when I may have made the mistake, frankly, of talking about assembling a compensation committee at the same time as we're experiencing some financial pain, because I think that the translation there quickly becomes, well, somehow we're going to lose something. And so I don't want us to go into this with that mindset, because I fear that that potentially is somewhat paralyzing as well. And part of the reality is as we start to zero in on what things may interest us, how we may want to move forward, then we will, on some level, the board members who are here will have to have some board dialogue about what is it that we can afford. I think Bob's analogy, you may hear later, if I'm stealing your thunder, Bob, I'm sorry, but the concept of building a house and needing to have a budget to do so. And we're in the process of, we're going to start talking about building a house. And so we just need to have that budget in place. So we'll revisit that soon. I also wanted to mention, I heard some people talk about, want to make sure that we're developing something in this conversation where, it's maybe predictable. It's simple. It is competitive with, neighbors in our region, so that there's an attractiveness to it. So those are the kinds of things I've already heard from some of you in preparation for tonight, in terms of just sort of what's rolling around in your own minds. And that's certainly what we're going to get to. So with that, I think, Bob, I'm going to kick it back to you for what will be at least a big chunk of this tonight. And that is kind of the eye-opening realities to some of the compensation that might be out there and how we may be looking at this.
All right, thank you, Steve. Yeah, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen. And Steve, did everybody get a copy of the PowerPoint before the meeting?
No, I did not previously share it. So this will be news to them. They'll be following along with bated breath.
Yeah, I know nothing excites people more than a PowerPoint at 6:30 or 6 o'clock in the evening. That gets the crowds coming in. So what I'm going to do, because I'm very respectful of people's time, is that where there is information that you can access and read from the material, so that can all be shared with you.
And
that,
I will gladly do that too as soon as we wrap up here this evening, Bob.
all right, fantastic. Because I'm going to skip ahead and not go over some things that, frankly, I think they're important from data points, but they're also things that you can read yourselves. And I want to kind of more focus on the ones where we can start creating a dialogue between and amongst us ourselves. And basically what the items were that I skipped ahead are things that kind of build the foundation, because one of the pieces that's asked in this frequently is, well, why should we do anything? And many districts come to this question with different realities. Some of them come to this conversation because they're not retaining their staff. They're having high levels of turnover. Others are coming to this conversation because when they go out and they have a vacancy, their salary is not competitive in the marketplace, whether for all certifications or for some. And for some, they have fiscal situation where they can't afford the existing pay system. And in many districts, it's a combination of all those things. And so the first thing that we do as a committee is try to figure out where we are today on those various indices. What is our rate of turnover? What does it look like when we post a position as far as applicants we have? What are the salary demands of those applicants? What are the salary demands of incumbent staff? Because obviously the easiest way not to fill a vacancy is not to have someone leave in the first place. So trying to figure out why are people leaving the school system if they are. In preparation for this meeting, I mean, Steve shared with me some data that the district has where, and this is one I kind of say with bated breath because you don't want to curse something, you've been doing a pretty good job overall of retaining your staff. From the information that was shared with me, you're far below the state average on teacher turnover. So that's a factual indicator to me, and hopefully for the group, as to where are we starting from, in this conversation. Because I heard many of you say things about having a pay system that attracted people to the system, but also retain those who have made commitments. And many of you in your intros, you've made significant commitments, or not many of you, all of you have, to this school system. And so that's obviously something that, in looking at a pay system, you want to be appreciative of and recognize. So that's a way to start in what I have up on the screen there, and hopefully everybody can see it. Can everybody see where this slide, how to address the teacher pay issue? Everybody have that? All right, so the first thing we want to really do as a group is figure out what presently exists. And Josh made a comment about being the BEA president and helping to implement that agreement. And so for the committee as a whole, because for the teachers here, you're probably pretty familiar with it. I'm certain Ruth and Steve are. But if you're not living and breathing it every day, we kind of have to figure out what presently exists. How does that look going forward? And as Steve mentioned in the beginning, one of the things that we had a conversation with the board about back in January was, when does this group kick off? And one of the things that was brought up of, our budgets at a school level are very dependent on what the state legislature decides we're going to get for increases in our revenue limit. They're also very impacted by our enrollment. And this year, in many ways, was as unique a year as ever, hopefully one that many of us don't want to repeat, but we had big variations in enrollment. There's a lot of uncertainty as what's going to happen with the state budget. Governor Evers has proposed his budget, and we're waiting to see what comes about with the legislative reaction to that further down the road and when that will be solved. That doesn't mean that you don't address the issue at all. You obviously have to address it. Many of you talked about where you are in your careers, whether you're in your first or second year and you want to see some form of career pathway. And similarly, those who are mid-career, so to speak, let's see, well, I know what I have now. Where are we going in the future to make sure that I want to stay committed to the school system? And then those who've been here for a long time, you want to make sure that you wish to continue here and you're rewarded for the service you've provided to the school system. So the first step is, what it presently exists, and is it fiscally sustainable? And that's a piece that, you know, Ruth will probably be providing a fair amount of data for the group on to try to figure out what can you do? Is it something that you can afford the existing structure that exists? The next thing that you have when you look at that existing pay system is you gave some answers as to why you're in on the group. And hopefully what the survey puts forth is information from the staff as to what their goals are for compensation. Similarly, how does that line up with the districts? So in the last 10 plus years, when there's been a lot of changes in compensation systems, districts came in here with their different goals. Some districts emphasized professional development. And it's not, when I say this, I'm not saying that they didn't emphasize other pieces, they just elevated one over the other. Others maybe had a really robust teacher evaluation system. And so they incorporated that into the pay system. Others looked at it and said, everything's working fine with what we've got. I don't need to change it. You know, it's working. And that was their goal. They were reducing their turnover. They had the ability to compete in the marketplace, et cetera. And so all those things come into play. But then when you dive down deeper, you try to figure out, well, how does that pay plan impact things like class size, program offerings? And we talked about attracting, retention staff, et cetera. How long does it take someone to reach the maximum salary? You know, so what is it if you come in and one of you's mentioned you're in your first year, you know, and you're looking at the grid, well, I can see on paper what that grid might say I make, but am I going to move every year to get there? I worked with one school system and they had a grid that had been in place for a long period of time, but they weren't moving people through the grid. And that created this dissonance of people looking at it and saying, I should be here on, let's say, step 7, but I'm at 4 because you've frozen me 3 out of the last 6 years. And so what does that do for people if the district's looking and say, well, I can't migrate you through the grid? You know, what does that mean? So what is the real time it takes someone to get to that maximum salary? And depending on the systems, there might be something you look at and you say, well, that's great. That's aligning with what we want to reward. We want to reward that professional development. The teacher's done it. They've migrated over. They've made that higher salary. That's what we want to have happen. So we're going to analyze your existing pay system and hear from you as to what that means. The next piece that when Steve and I spoke before this meeting, we thought would be the next step, and this is what I've used with districts when we've done this. I've really kicked off with that survey of the staff after we go through an introductory meeting like this. And the survey is one that we have surveys we've used with other districts, and I might bring you a template to work off of. But as Steve mentioned earlier, I don't have a pride of authorship on it. If the committee decides we want to change the questions in full or in part, drop some, add some, tweak the verbiage, it's really the committee's survey. And we want to get that information from the staff as to things that they think are working well now, things they think that aren't. We want to ask them things of, you know, what do they aspire to? What are they afraid of in this? You know, what are their concerns they have? And all of that information will help educate us as a group. And ultimately, that data will help educate the board as an entity when the board has to adopt whatever it is that the committee, or consider whatever it is the committee comes up with in the system. So some of the things that we will look at is we're going to look at aggregate fiscal amounts, both for salaries, compensation, additional duties, assignments. We will have a sustainability conversation. So what Steve was alluding to with the house metaphor is when I've worked with groups, I have really pressed the school boards and administration to come up with some idea of the financial money of what you're looking to spend. And the metaphor there is, if anybody's ever went and done new construction or add an addition onto a house, refurbish something, if you just say to the contractor or the architect, I want to redo my kitchen, some will go, great. And they maybe won't ask you what you're willing to spend, but the vast majority will say, well, what's your budget? You know, before we go through the whole list of everything you want, what's your budget on this? Can we afford those granite countertops? Can we afford this? So much square footage, all those various things are in it. And even though it's kind of a strained metaphor, the same thing applies here. And so one of the things that I'm fearful of, if Steve says, well, he comes in with no predisposed notions, one that I do have is, or two. One is whatever you come up with is version 1.0. You will end up making tweaks to it to hopefully improve it and make it better. What I don't want as an outcome is you adopt it, and then 2 years later you go, boy, this was a great thing on paper, but we can't afford it, and/or we can't afford it in monetary terms, or we can't afford it in the amount of time that it's taking the teacher away from his or her primary duty, which is educating children or being a counselor for children or providing therapy services to children. Very cognizant of that. And early on, right after Act 10 happened, some districts dove into alternative compensation systems that had a lot of requirements for someone to move through the system. A lot of things outside of the classroom that you had to do. And maybe that was something where some districts felt there was pent-up need for that. Well, there was also pent-up need for salary. And so staff spent a lot of time doing those things that resulted in them migrating, or some staff did, that resulted in them migrating through the pay system. And well, that came at a cost, both financially and, I don't know about you, but I know for me, there's only so many hours in a day. And so when things get added on of things you have to do to get a pay increase, you have to take into account what is being displaced by that new responsibility. And that's something as a committee, I would encourage you whenever something comes up is not only just look at it from the fiscal lens, but also the time commitment lens as to how it impacts the employee who has to do that work, and then also the administrator who has to track to see that it was done. So that's kind of a long way to say that word sustainability is used not to say no, it's used to say, how do we know how we rank our priorities in the pay system and what's attainable both in the short term and the long run. So then after those kind of information has been gleaned from us, we want to look at, well, what are our goals for the compensation system? My assumption is the survey is going to help you a long ways in that. You're going to get the staff's feedback on how strongly they feel they should be rewarded for master's degrees or National Board for Professional Teaching Standards or additional class loads or teaching in particular content areas. So that's going to be something you're going to see. You're also going to look at from the realistic standpoint that we do exist in a labor market. And so how does the pay system work to attract and retain the best staff? So what does the pay system have in it to attract people in hard to fill certifications? Are there particular skills that the district wants to reward or not? And at the same time, when that's being discussed, whatever the pay system is, and very sensitive to this, is those differentiations that might be there in either initial placement or for payment for particular skills. How is that mitigated so as to not damage morale? I mean, one of the first systems I was working with the district on this, what the superintendent had a comment at that time when he said from his particular bias, he said, if someone asked me what the most important job in the school system was, I'd say a first grade teacher. Anybody want to guess why he said that? No guesses? All right. Well, his rationale was that grade level is so vital for teaching reading. And if children can't read, it's really hard for them to do all sorts of other things. That was like the building block foundational position. He said on the flip side of that, because if I went with my heart, I'd pay the first grade teachers more than anybody. If I looked at labor market at that time, there were more applicants for first grade teacher positions than there were for some other certifications. How do you balance that? How do you take that into account? And I've been doing this for a long time, and I get a lot of questions from administrators, particularly when we're in the months of July and August, where someone exits the school system and they have to find a special ed teacher or a tech ed teacher or family and consumer ed, a therapist, and there's literally no applicants. It's what do I do? How do I fill that job and still respect the incumbent employees, knowing that there's more turnover than there was several years ago? So that to us, I think, is going to be an area where, when I've worked with committees, just laying out here, this is an area where committees have really had some difficult conversations between the committee members on this topic as to how do you treat people with different certifications. And again, there's not necessarily a quote unquote right answer for how that is approached. So earlier when I talked about the goals, you want to ask the questions of what do you want out of your compensation system and how you want to motivate people. So do you want to motivate staff to pursue particular professional development? And districts have taken different approaches on this. Some have used the compensation system to do that. So they will say, well, we're going to pay you more for that master's degree, for the national board, for the acquisition of particular professional development. You go to a writer's workshop or whatever. You have a certain amount of PD you have to do over a set period of time, particularly now that the licensure rules have been modified and some staff have lifetime licenses. So because of that fact, some districts have used the pay system to encourage the professional development financially. Others have said, you know what, we're going to leave that separate and distinct from the pay system. We're going to have the professional development as part of our built-in calendar. And so the pay system isn't going to put the same emphasis on this professional development that occurs outside of the traditional workday. One of the things, and it's just one word there, but I've heard this frequently from staff, is clarity. And this is something that between now and we meet and when we come back to go through the survey questions, I would ask you just to, if you have some colleagues who work in another school system, just ask them, we're working on a pay system. Do you think your pay system in your district is clear? Do you understand it? Does it make sense to you? And I don't necessarily want you to come back and say, oh, the teachers in X district, they can't understand their pay system at all. Just curious as to what your colleagues, that you have friends, colleagues, peers in other districts, if they understand that. Because one of the things that I heard frequently from districts in going through this is that the staff really appreciate pay systems that they understand and that are clear, that you can look at and go, yes, I can see how I would move on this. And from a district standpoint of attracting people, that's vitally important. When I've worked with the districts and I'll ask someone in the first couple of years of their tenure in the district, why did you come here? And then if I said, did you look at the pay system? Yeah, I did, and I could understand it. My prior district, I had no idea. And some of that will be the optics too of when you come up with a finalized product, how is that articulated? I had one district, they paid, I think like $5,000 more for a master's degree, but the grid just had one column, and then there was text down in the bottom that described the payment for the master's degree. And the question was asked, why wouldn't you just put the other column over there with a master's degree? So people instantly see those numbers. Eric, you're a principal. If you're putting that offer out, you kind of want to get that initial impression that, oh, here's the maximum salary. I don't want to look at a lower maximum salary and have a bunch of textual add-ons on it. So can I figure out how I would move through it? So that's been a consistent theme is there a career pathway and I can see what the path is? I don't have to be an intrepid explorer to try to figure out where I end up at the end of it. So how have districts looked at this? Many, many, many of them have focused on the starting pay rates. So in particular, if they felt they were down compared to the market, but they also looked at it as far as the question of how does that starting pay rate line up with the maximum as far as the years of service it's going to take for someone to migrate through. And as far as pay increases, as Steve said in the beginning, the district's very respectful of the relationship with the BEA, and the pay increases are going to be determined to a large degree through negotiations with the BEA on total base wages. There will be other forms of compensation that are outside of total base wages, and aren't subject to negotiations, but they can still be subject to meet and confer meetings where the parties discuss it. They just can't end up in a collective bargaining agreement. And you can see some of the various items that come up in that process for how people address those. So whether they pay for years of service or educational development, whether there's pay on performance or evaluation, the supply and demand issues when we were talking about certification, ad hoc pay decisions, not something I have it listed there because some pay systems have it. Obviously, as an attorney, not a fan of those. Kind of like to have criterion that are analyzed and then documentation. So if there's some deviation, you know why it happened. Payment for assumption of additional duties, whether they're permanent, temporary, if you have peer coaches, peer mentors, how that gets played into it. But that consistent theme that there's a pathway that can be identified to the individual when they come in. And so one of the questions the committee will obviously look at is, starting pay rates. Where do teachers new to the district start? And whether it's based on education, experience, hard to fill certifications, multiple certifications, bilingual or multilingual teachers, whatever differentiations you look at that affect those starting pay rates, while being cognizant of where you start people in may affect the incumbents who've already been here. And that's been a big issue when people have redone their pay systems. I'm sure if you talk to your colleagues about it, it's something they often come back with is, are you valuing outside experience at the same or less than you do internal experience? So you don't have people leapfrogging internal people who have more experience than the outside applicant. And that's a really tough one for your administrators right now because the labor market can be so fluid. I'll give you a quick anecdote. 2 districts this week, I guess this week is Monday, 2 districts today. One's talking to me, they have upwards of 50 candidates applying for an 8th grade math position. Another one in the northwestern part of the state for a high school social studies position had 2 applicants. And the reason why I share that is there can be enormous differences geographically and based on the salary schedule that's in effect as to, and the certifications as to who you get to apply for a position. And I don't envy what your administrators go through in trying to fill those spots, particularly when they're late resignations. So as a committee, we're going to have to address that topic. Whatever you come up with as a solution is up to you. But how does that get addressed for where do new to the system teachers start? Not necessarily brand new with no experience, but someone walking in, how do they get treated when they come in? And that's what this slide gets to. What effect does the pay rate of those staff have on continuing teachers? Does it result in a lift to the incumbents? How does it impact your ability to hire? Do you exclude some people because it's going to have a ripple effect and be damaging for morale or retention of other individuals? We don't want to have, in my opinion, a pay system where by hiring the new person in, the incumbents say, so should I quit and then reapply for my job and I'll get a pay increase? You want to take into account those kind of strange fact patterns that may come about. As far as those pay increases, I think I addressed it earlier as to whether they're across the board increases, whether they're the same percentage, which if it's the same percentage, that'll drive the maximum salaries will go up at a higher dollar amount than the starting, or if they're fixed dollars, your base will go up at a higher percentage than your maximums. And so there's pros and cons, but to both of those, depending upon what you're looking at in the process. Payments for years of service. Right now, you have steps for years of service. Many districts have retained something like that. They may not call it steps. They might call it levels. They might call it just plain old years of service or thresholds, whatever it happens to be, incentive levels, improvement levels, whatever they are. But there's many districts who've retained some recognition that individuals will make more based upon their experience in the school system. That being said, there may also be a conversation about where do evaluations come into the mix. Some districts don't use evaluation at all in the process. Some have used it as an on-off switch that basically if the employee's not on a plan of improvement, they continue to migrate through. If they're on a plan of improvement, they may stall during that year they're on a plan of improvement. And then hopefully after they improve, they then migrate through again. Some have very elaborate pay systems that really delve into and pay teachers differently based upon their evaluative outcomes. The piece on this as well is when we talk about the pay of services, like how many steps and levels and tiers will you have? And you have that tension between sustainability and attainability. So I can't remember off the top of my head which one of you said this is your first year, but if you looked at a salary schedule and you looked at it and you said, oh, that's great, you have a maximum salary of a particular number, but it's going to take me 35 years to get there. This might seem a bit of a ways off to someone who's 23, 24, 25 years old. On the flip side, if you looked at it and you had a 9-step schedule that someone could go from a starting salary of 45,000, let's say, to 70 in 9 years, it's going to be really hard for Ruth to budget for, because you're going to have really large increases annually in it. So where is your balance that you come up with as a school system? So that, kind of that Goldilocks, what's enough of a pay increase to say, yes, this is the right call for me, this is the right district, I'm able to keep pace with inflation, pay my bills, pay off my student debt, set some money aside, and yet at the same time, the district's able to say, yeah, we're able to maintain our programming with this kind of plan. And that I think is another one of those difficult conversations that districts have had, is that tension between sustainability and attainability. So as I mentioned before, there's that career pathway, that you look at it and laying that out for someone to understand where they go. And then how does the licensure play into that? Now with the lifetime licensure, as I mentioned earlier, districts have now sometimes revisited that to get more into the certification line of it. Pay for professional development. We talked about that, but I think that's going to be another area that you want to focus on. Some of these, I have had some districts they have set models with a great deal of autonomy to the teacher to decide what he or she wishes to do for their professional development. Others have done that plus some targeted professional development. What I mean by that is they might say, for everyone who participates in X particular professional development this year, we will offer an additional $500, or that will qualify if the pay system has some standards for PD you have to do every 5 years or something. And so it's a way to kind of both offer carrot approach to someone to do it while giving their flexibility and perhaps being a little bit outside of the norm that existed pre-Act 10, which was pretty consistent. Movement through a schedule was based on higher ed credit hours. That some districts looked and said, well, that's one way of doing it, but there might be other ways that people can get professional development without having to pay collegiate tuition. There might be other programming that's available. And then we'll get to this piece, and this is where I'm not going to come in, as Steve mentioned, and tell you not to do something. I will ask questions though, because we've seen a lot of pay systems come and go. We've seen a lot get tweaked. And so it might just be some of these various questions about the unintended consequences. So one of those I mentioned earlier on was, what will the pay system's impact be on your teacher workload? What is it that you're asking of staff to do in order to get a pay increase? And will that negatively impact upon their ability to be a coach, advisor, help a kid tutoring through some issue, being an ear for some student to go talk to before you refer them to Chris, as a counselor, those kind of things that come in. What does it do for salary compression? So that's been, as districts have raised the starting pay, people looking at it saying, well, I've been here for 4 years and I'm making the same amount as someone who was hired a year ago. How does that come into the conversation? We talked already about the employees new to the system making more than incumbents. And then if you come up with a pay system that rewards the individual for the individual's outcomes, could that potentially negatively influence collaboration between staff, if student learning outcomes were a part of it? So that's I think I'm going to skip the health insurance piece, Steve, and 'cause I think the rest of it for tonight, I just really wanted to go through those fundamental questions on the compensation and the salary piece of it, and then kind of open it up to questions for folks as to what they may have on that topic.
Bob, do you want to just take a quick pause here for a moment and give people, you know, kind of a 5-minute break as we're about midway through the meeting here, and then that gives you an opportunity to regroup with your slides?
Oh, sure thing. Yeah, no, I'm good.
Okay. So if folks want to do that, get up, stretch, take a walk, get a glass of water, grab a little snack. It's 6:33, and so we'll put Bob back on here at 6:38, and then we'll go through this other part before we then kind of break into some Q&A and some work on the survey. So we'll see you in about 5 minutes. Just want to let everybody know we'll come back in about a minute and get started here again, about a minute. All right. Hopefully you at least got to stand up and stretch or use the washroom or grab a snack or whatever, and appreciate kind of the punctuality, and we'll try to stay on track here and on time. So as soon as we get most of our folks back, we'll go ahead and keep on with kind of the second part here.
Hey, Bob, real quick, Josh Dow here. I just do have a question. I saw one of the slides that you flipped through before we went on break, said something, I believe, about health insurance. Is that part of this conversation as well?
Not that I'm aware of right now, Josh. I just have that in there as far as, those are generally things that districts look at when this, but not as far as anything that I have been instructed or talked to about. I think we're really looking at salary at the present time.
Okay, thank you, sir.
No, it's a really good question, Josh. So thank you, because the slide deck that I'll share does have that stuff in there. So I certainly don't want that to be at all confusing. I think, there's just kind of categorically some stuff that, Bob shares with folks. And so, certainly as people review that, kind of take it on face value. But yeah, that's not, at least, unless it comes up here with the committee, that's not necessarily part of what we're thinking to talk about.
Yeah, Josh, and thanks, Steve. I think, Josh, what I've seen in other districts, when let's say when we work to formulate that survey as a group, very often people will come back, and because I'm given both the opportunity to just fill out a survey and rank things by numbers and stuff like that, but also text. And very often people will come and say, I really value X, and health insurance is often the one that or they'll say, my fear is that I'll pay for my salary increase through insurance concessions. But then you may also, particularly, I would assume even this year will be more than in years past, people may say, the leave benefits here are something that I find highly valuable. And so as a committee, even though we may not be directly addressing health insurance or leave provisions, et cetera, it will inform us as to things that staff may find to be valuable that retain people, or attract people to it. And I think it's something for us to also know if you are looking at other school systems and you compare one compensation system to another. And I have to say that that's gotten much, much more difficult. It's much more difficult to say, what will a teacher with 15 years of experience make in Burlington compared to Racine or Kenosha or Waterford, et cetera, than it was 10 years ago. 10 years ago, Josh, as you recall, we had fairly similar salary schedules. We had benchmarks we compared, and the insurances varied to some degree, but there wasn't a great deal of variance. Today, we might have a district that has a $6,000 upfront deductible, and they might pay half of it to an HSA, and another district has a $250, $500 deductible. How do you take that into account when comparing the salary grids? And so I think what summed it up best was a board member that Steve may recall when we were doing this in another district, and he said you kind of have private sector like negotiations in some respects, but with public sector open records. So everybody can see what everybody makes and what all the benefits are, but at the same time, the employer has control over the benefits, the leave provisions, et cetera, because the scope of bargaining has been reduced so much. And so as a committee, we have to be very sensitive to those answers that are provided to us. But in general, we're really looking at the salary grid. And I don't know, Steve, there's anything you wanted to add onto that, or if any of the board members wish to at this time either.
Yeah, nothing from me, Bob, other than just kind of appreciation for the question, and that, want to make sure that we've, even in tonight's kind of more dump of information, that we make sure we have a little time at the end for folks to popcorn some questions if they want.
Yeah, and so as Steve mentioned, the materials there in the beginning part of it that I wasn't going through, that kind of lays the groundwork for some things that you may or may not be doing as far as tracking why people are leaving, but also why are people staying. And so in the surveys, I think we want to ask, what is it that keeps you in the school system? And then people can list some of the things that are both intrinsic, working with the students, working with your colleagues and the parents, and those that are, extrinsic. Well, I really like X in the pay system, or I really like my health insurance, leave provisions, or whatever happens to be the professional development I get. Those kind of things can all be in there.
So before we give Bob the green light to continue on with kind of the next segment, any other real quick questions or clarifications? I think if we're hearing none, Bob, we'll say let's keep going, plowing through.
Okay. Yeah. So what I'm going to do briefly is I'm going to next go to the legal piece that we have on this. If I can get this to share, and of course there we go. All right. Does everybody have this laws and other limitations on the design of a compensation system? All right. Fantastic. Thank you for the thumbs up. All right. So what we've been talking about so far is just some of those basic questions that we want to have before us that we can ruminate over for a bit. And then when we meet again to formulate those survey questions, we have some idea of some of those things. But the other thing is, and this is probably the big legal disclaimer here, is that there are certain things that do impact our ability to do some things. And I think this is good from a standpoint of teachers understanding what is possible. And what I mean by that is, I'm not so naive, and I've done enough of these to know that there's a lot of apprehension and angst and anxiety when a district says they're creating a compensation system or looking at changes. Oftentimes, it's almost the subliminal message comes out of that is they're looking for a way to pay me less. And that, I can tell you, is not the goal here. The goal that the board, when we spoke about it, is to come up with a system that is sustainable going forward, but does those things that your principals said, that Steve said, Ruth talked about, and many of you have there. It's kind of rethinking this. And one of the big legal protections that employees have in this process is that when we go through this, is that you have your individual contracts. And the individual contracts delineate a salary. And that salary cannot be reduced without the employee's consent and or without going through the non-renewal process. I've gotten no indications that the goal in this process is to reduce anyone's salary. And so one of the things that the committee will most likely consider, and many districts have come to this, is what is the floor increase that someone's going to get in the new pay system? Because depending upon where you come out with this, there may be some individuals who get a larger lift than somebody else in the short term. There may be some who get larger lifts in the long term. in their salary. But what is the floor? So many districts have come off, and that's where Ruth and her crew will work with the school board and Steve to say, what is the minimum increase that we can put in? So no one's going back, right, in this process. And that individual contract locks your salary in. As I mentioned previously, with that story about that board member, teacher compensation is a public record that is subject to release. And so anybody in the public can make a records request, not only for the compensation plan as a whole, but also for what any individual teacher makes, and look at it. And one of the reasons I bring that up is, and I'm sure you're all aware of that piece, but one of the things that comes up in that is, if the committee was to put something in the pay system that compensates teachers more for positive evaluations, the evaluations in of themselves wouldn't be subject to release, but someone may be able to figure out indirectly what your evaluative score was or ranking based on your pay increase. And so we have some districts who do this, where a teacher may get an additional bonus, or their lift may be based upon a certain criteria. Maybe it's tied to educator effectiveness, maybe it's their own internal model. But for illustration purposes, let's just say that the district said they had a point scale of 20. And any teacher who gets 12 or more gets the minimum pay increase. And then for each 2 points above the 12, you get an extra $500. Well, we had something like that in the school system, and some parents asked for the teacher's salary in year 1, and then the teacher's salary in year 2, and then they figured out pretty much from that what people's evaluative scores were. They didn't get the evaluation, but they got the evaluative scores. And so even though the evals weren't subject to release, people could kind of figure out which teacher got a better evaluation than another. Anybody want to guess what that can result in? Any ideas? All right, well, what it can result in is parents making requests for their kids to go to the teacher with the higher score. It can result in teachers saying, was I truly objectively evaluated by the principal? It can result in the principal going, boy, I'm really looking at evaluation as a professional growth model, but now my evaluation is going to be tied to their pay increase. Am I comfortable with that? So not saying it's the right or wrong thing to do, but just be aware that public records exist. And if evaluation is tied into the pay system, you may be able to, or not you, a requester of the records may be able to figure that out. There's obviously employment discrimination law issues. So how is the pay system structured from a standpoint of want to minimize any sort of implicit or explicit biases based on age, gender, or other prohibited bases of law? And so is it a pay system that's facially neutral and operates that way with respect to those protected class categories? And so there's all these various protective pieces of labor legislation that can be out there. The one I'm going to briefly talk about is the Equal Pay Act. So this is a provision of the law that interprets sex discrimination. That's basically equal pay for work that has equal skill, effort, and responsibility in similar working conditions. In the last 10 years, we have had these issues come up from time to time, not very frequently, but they have. We had one court decision on it. But as a group, it's something we obviously want to be cognizant of, is if you set up a pay system, can you make sure that it's any sort of deviations in pay are based on legitimate objective criterion? I mentioned briefly in the evaluative piece, there can also be legal implications if the pay system takes into account student learning outcomes. State law does allow those to be utilized for a pay system. There have been some districts who've had those and continue to, whether they are bonuses for a group of teachers or an individual if certain student learning outcomes are achieved, or whether they are permanent fixtures of the salary for the person. That's something you can think of, and we can survey to see what the staff's reactions to them are. But they are there. I'd say they're in a minority of the pay systems, but there are some that have them. I know of a couple in your area that use student progress to result in some compensation adjustments. There's me at the end. So the other big legal implication that Steve mentioned at the beginning, and Josh, is here as part of the group, and there may be other members of the BEA as well, is that the ability that, or the requirement that we have to bargain over total base wages with the BEA. So whatever compensation system is put into effect, the BEA retains the exclusive right to bargain over total base wages. And that's it for the legal implications at this point that I have. And Steve, that's pretty much what I have for the materials, because I didn't go through those ones that kind of just say what the labor market is like and number of applicants, et cetera. So I really wanted to have more conversation versus me just presenting things to folks. So I'd open it up for questions that people may have had about anything that I covered, or things just on the process in of itself that you have questions on.
Yeah, that was exactly where I was going to go, is that, if we have some folks, if we want to kind of leave a little airtime here, just if there's any questions about some of these, Bob covered some sort of basic questions that tend to come up during, these conversations. I know one that I've talked with a number of the principals in the district about is some of the labor market headaches, frankly, and trying to hire and bring people in. And, as other districts around us have other kind of different alternative types of systems, it's hard to find whether or not we can place people in our system that is more traditional. There's pros and cons, advantages and disadvantages, but those kinds of basic questions that Bob covered, if you have something specific to an experience maybe that he has, or if he's seen something in a district that has worked or not, and certainly the legal implications as well. So I just kind of want to pause there and just leave it open. We're not such a big group that we got to probably, break it out. You can just unmute yourself and ask away.
Bob, I know you said you're not going to give us a model, you've seen many, but it kind of alludes to where we ended before you went into the legal ramifications. What are some other things that would be considered compensation? And I think I know some of the answers. You alluded to some of those. It's number of days off, personal days. Those things that we're also looking to consider with this group? Are we truly looking for what shows up on your contract, that we're not going to delve into any employee handbook, or we have some unique things with some long-term disability and some of that type post-retirement benefits yet, those types of things. Are those considered as part of this discussion or not? Or do you have other examples that we want to look at in that survey that we're planning on giving to staff? Because I think some of our staff might not even be aware of some of the ancillary advantages we have.
Yeah. And I think there's two parts of that there, Eric. One is, the mission of the committee is really established by the board. And so the board can say what the scope it is that they want the committee to look at, whether it's the salary compensation or whether it's larger, and the pros and cons of going in either direction. If it's, which is perhaps different than just informing staff of this is what you have, or finding out anomalies on things. So when the survey comes in, we had one school system that had multiple buildings, and a number of the staff expressed concerns about the way that their leave time was docked, basically in like 15-minute increments. And they found that very disconcerting because, they would stay for IEP meetings, parent-teacher conferences, et cetera. And you all know how many hours you put in, but if they left at 3:45 p.m., they were docked a quarter an hour of sick leave, personal leave, whatever happened to be. Well, the district discovered that one of their buildings didn't have any teachers complaining about it. So they're trying to figure out, well, what's going on there. Well, it turned out the principal there just told people blow off the handbook, which is generally something, you know, administrations and HR don't like you to do. But what it did was it kind of illustrated how something could look neutral on its face and have other ramifications for staff. You know, staff resented that 15-minute doc more than just about anything else we were talking about in the compensation committee. And so to your question, that issue didn't get addressed by the compensation committee, but the light got shown on it or shined on it. And so then that got referred over to another place. And as far as the other piece of that is, yeah, I won't come in and say you should adopt the pay system that's in a place in, you know, Middleton Cross Plains, you know, Sun Prairie, wherever, you know, Walworth. But we can say if the committee wants to say, you know, I want to see an example of a pay system that takes into account X. So let's say evaluations. Oh, here's Heartland Lakeside. Here's Elmbrook. You know, those are ones that have evaluation. I want to see the most simplistic pay system you have that a district's worked on and where they addressed everything kind of outside the pay system. Okay, here's Eau Claire. You know, I mean, I can do that for you without, and I'm sure Josh can contact the WEAC regional reps and they can provide examples too. That to me is helpful, you know, because then you can see things. What I have cautioned within that though is, and that's where, you know, we've been asked for 11 years, what's the recommended WSB pay plan? And I consistently said over and over, and it's not to duck the work, it's the one you've adopted. Yeah, because we did early on have some districts who copied someone else's pay system. They went to our convention and they saw Kettle Moraine do a presentation or Heartland Lakeside, and they literally just put their name on the cover. Anybody want to guess what happened to those? They blew up in a year or two because there's no ownership. Yeah, and they perhaps didn't understand all the administrative time it would take in, and they didn't have the ambassadors locally who had constructed it. And so that's a key component here, is that what we hope to achieve as we get through this, and you look at these other examples of pay systems, you might say something, oh, I like the way they did that, or I don't like that, but you're going to modify all that to what fits for you. And hopefully we get to a spot, whether you're staying with the exact status quo or you have something radically different or something in between. If one of your work colleagues asks you a question about the pay plan, you're able to explain it as well as Ruth is, as I am, as Steve is, Eric, as you are, you know, as an administrator, right? You're able to explain that to say, oh, this is why they did that, or why we did that. And I think that's really helpful. And at the flip side of it, that list of unintended consequences is not exhaustive. And so there may be something that's done that we all think looks really good. And then you share it with one of your colleagues and they say, oh yeah, but then this, oh, we didn't know about that. We completely forgot about that teacher loan forgiveness program that certification area has or whatever. You know, so I mean, that's the benefit of having a group that has a broad diversity of background and experiences and the ability to go out and communicate what you have to others with, again, that recognition that this is version 1.0. You will change that.
Eric, too, I wanted to just add that I think it's a really good question, and maybe to enlighten the whole committee that I'm not sure that the idea of what's the full scope of the work of the committee by the board has been fully outlined yet. And I think some of that might be dictated by the results that come back on the survey and what it is that people share that they really do value and want to prioritize. And I don't want to put our three board members on the spot, but if Peter, Taylor, or Diane want to comment about where they think maybe the board's view on that scope question lies, I mean, certainly please do. If not, that's fine too.
I'll jump in. We had this discussion at the board level, Josh and Eric's question exactly. And I think the challenge was, and Bob gave us some guidance on this, was how big do we tackle, or how much apple do we bite off? But certainly the benefits question is tied to compensation. I mean, I think they're integral, but maybe we wait to see the results of the survey and decide how deep we're going to go. Another alternative is we at the risk of setting up another committee, which I'm not sure anyone wants, maybe we tackle this as a separate standalone topic where we look at all the other benefits that the district offers to our staff.
Yeah, and I have, to that point, Peter, I have had districts when they've gone through the compensation/salary conversation who already had standing health insurance committees, for example. And the decision was made that they, in essence, lived in silos, because the health committee might be something that goes on for 20 years, or they've had it for a long period of time, and they're annually looking at provider networks or plan design changes, deductibles, copays, et cetera. But the compensation committee was extremely sensitive to, we don't want people thinking that we made this insurance change just solely to free up money for the salary schedule. And on the flip side, if you had a year where, unfortunately, if you got a 25% health insurance increase, you're probably going to have to look at it. And if that happened to be the same year you're looking at the salary schedule and the compensation system, that's a reality. Some districts may be held off in that circumstance, or like I said, they kept them siloed. I have not had too many who tied the health insurance together. They have, to Eric's question, they often have looked at some other things in the benefit package, where perhaps they were less, how do I want to put it? It wasn't something that they had to look at every single year. Districts typically don't look at their leave language every single year. Health insurance, you got insurance consultants coming in talking to you every single year about trends that are happening and what your experience ratings are, provider network changes. So I think people are more accustomed to that being reviewed on a consistent basis.
And I don't want to dominate the conversation. I just got one other clarification. It gets back to, again, our full purpose. Are we looking truly at our academic compensation from the instructional day, or are we also planning on looking at our extracurricular compensation as part of this committee too? I think that's probably is as contentious, if not, sometimes on a lot of people's minds too, when they start comparing what district to district's getting to. So that was the only other question I have. And then again, I think if not, maybe that's something will be an ancillary comment that we learned from the survey that we may, back to Bob's point, we have our insurance committee, but we may have a different committee forming off of extracurricular compensation too.
No, that's an excellent question, Eric. And obviously that's up to the board to decide. What I have seen has been districts have not typically brought in the extracurriculars and advisorships into this system. And part of it, as you alluded to, that, you could, having done those with some districts, that is very labor intensive to figure out the relative skill, workload, length of season, number of students supervised, et cetera, and taking into account Title IX in addition into an extracurricular pay system. So districts that I've assisted on that has been not quite as lengthy as a full compensation system, but it is a very labor intensive process. And so that's ultimately the board's call on it. If you were to do them, it probably would be best in my mind to do it as, it's going to be coterminous, but have a separate group, because I think at that point, you'd really want representation from active coaches and advisors and athletic activities director, et cetera, to go in there and figure it out. But again, that's just what I've seen, generally speaking, with it.
I have a question, and maybe this is more for you, Steve, than Bob, but I know Bob mentioned in his PowerPoint talk about Burlington having a relatively low teacher turnover, which I think we'll get to, I'm sure, in another meeting and looking at our current compensation package. But looking for a little overview on what's driving this conversation from the administrative side. If our turnover is pretty good, then like you said, Steve, early, it looks like it has something to do with cost savings by you guys in making a change.
I think it's a great question, Jack. And I think that, generally speaking, at least for me, there's a couple of things, but then I also think there may be some board members who are interested in this. I think that there is a sustainability question. I would not be sheepish about that in terms of like how expensive is what we're doing. And at some point, we'll have Ruth present a, sort of a chart, like where do our staff lie? Where are they in the tenure of the, typical 35-year span of a teacher? Where are our folks sitting on the current salary schedule? What's the burden to the overall budget? Those sorts of things. I do personally, as your superintendent, I do worry about that. What is affordable and sustainable? So I won't pretend like that's not real. Having said that, though, I also kind of believe, Jack, that our reality is one of choices. And we could opt to say, well, we want to prioritize certain things in the way that people are compensated. And I've had young staff who have approached me and said, the only way that I can make more money is to spend more money and go back to school. And somebody potentially who leaves, I'll just say UW-Madison in 2020 and is $100,000 in debt, and they're making $40,000 a year. And then they say, but to go and make more money, I got to buy more credits essentially. And that in today's world, that's really frustrating. So I hear stories like that, that becomes a driver for me. And it goes into some of those basic questions. There are people in the district we've hired in the last couple of years who, an interview team will come forward and say, we want to hire candidate A. They're amazing. They walk on water. They're a 10 out of 10 on our scale. And we go and try to hire candidate A, and we can't match their salary because they're in some sort of an alternative compensation model. And we're $12,000 shy of being able to even recruit that candidate. Then I say with a smile to the committee, well, who's your candidate B? Who's number 2? And they say to me, well, Steve, our candidate number 2 is a 5 on our 10-point scale, but has a master's degree and yada, yada, yada. And we're going to pay that person $30,000 more than we would have paid candidate A. And so those are frustrating conversations, as we all might imagine. But those, for me, that became a driver. At the same time, board members had attended a variety of conversations at board level conferences where I think there is a belief that we could simply do better by staff in terms of long-term retention and recruitment. And so I definitely can appreciate that the optics are there. And I do think there is a financial piece. I don't want to dismiss that. But I don't think that that's the ultimate driver, because I actually think we'll probably leave the conversation having something to propose to our board that will likely cost more money and will ultimately end up driving other conversations and decisions about how the district operates if we want to be able to do whatever it is we come up with. Or it is possible that as a group, you might say, hey, we like it just the way it is. We're doing, we'll do all the research and the survey and study it and have the conversation. And at the end of the day, come midsummer, we don't want to change. Like, we don't really have a recommendation to do anything different. That is possible. And I think this would just be our due diligence to get to that spot. So hopefully that kind of answers it for you. But I also want to just give, again, board members a chance in case that's something they wanted to address.
I'll jump in again. There is a reality that we are challenged every year, and I'm sure you all know this, that we have very little control as at the local level over what the state allows us to tax, and then what aid we're given from the state, which is about 45% of our budget. And so there is a challenge sustainability wise, like Steve said. I'm also curious, I'm not an educator though, and one outcome I'd like to see from this committee is everyone on this call, almost everyone is an educator. What is the best professional development? Is that something we can look at? So I mean, I look at this as an opportunity for us to maybe look at our system and are we, doing the best possible model that we can come up with.
Yeah, and we'll definitely make sure that I want there to be ongoing opportunity for conversations, questions, et cetera. I also want to be cognizant of our time and in our last maybe 17 or 18 minutes, be able to just circle back on the idea of a couple of different things. One, that certainly I will pass along this PowerPoint that Bob was following. There's quite a bit there, so look at it, use it, study it, however you want. I will definitely do that. I also did want to just reiterate one thing he said earlier, and that because I've had this question too, and Jack, your question made me think of it. Nobody goes backwards. As whatever happens, if there is a new system at some point, when people crosswalk, nobody goes backwards. And I think that for everybody in this room to know that, to be able to reinforce that to colleagues is probably just a good thing in terms of our own wellness and mindset. And then the other part is a little bit of a question, and that is that we really, I think, as Bob and I talked about developing a survey, we really think that this group needs an opportunity to spend, the equivalent of a meeting like this, really hashing out the details, the questions, the implications of a survey, and really kind of look at getting out to people, out to our staff in enough time to get it back, and have some data for a meeting that would really be a roll up our sleeves kind of kickoff into the data type meeting. And so I'm just going to throw this out there for those of you that are heavy planners, and then I'll revisit this via an email communication to everybody. But originally we had Monday, April 5th. That's an in-service day for us in the district, but that evening was originally going to be a compensation committee meeting. So my proposal, and I'll put this into an email, would be that we resurrect that night as a night to come together and work through a draft of the survey that Bob will have for us, and really kind of hammer out the questions, and then to be able to look at a timeline where maybe that gets finalized that week. It goes out to staff the week of the 12th. We give staff 2 weeks to complete it. And then we'd have a week or two to compile the data, and then we could release that all back out to people by kind of mid-May. Because as you know, we end early, and so our timeline's pretty tight to get a really important tool, prepared for our use. And then the other part of my question to you that will come via email will be really the willingness to meet possibly over the summer. We have a long summer this year. Those summer months are when we will, in all likelihood, start to get some insight into the state budget. And so if we have all of our survey data back, by mid-May, one of the questions that I will pose back to the group, kind of, hey, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you feel about a couple of meetings over the summer? And I'll just solicit that back, maybe in a form even, where you tell me, yes, I can make April 5th happen, and where do I sit on summertime conversations? And then by then I'm also, and here's me sort of fingers crossed, hoping that we could do some of this in person, because much like the work that some of our colleagues did with the elementary school attendance boundaries, this is going to get into a lot of minutia, a lot of numbers, a lot of kind of hand-wrenching type conversations where our ability to be in space together is perhaps going to be really critical. And so I just want to put those three things out there: April 5th, possibility of summer, and then the hope that we could potentially be together doing some in-person work as well. Bob, am I leaving anything out that is on your mind?
No, I think the only thing that I would add on to that, Steve, is that the reason why we really want to get this survey done earlier is that my experience has been it's really hard to move forward without the survey completed. And we want to give you the opportunity to construct it. The other thing is, Steve will have to see how this works for the posting of the meeting and how the public could monitor the meeting. But I would like to have breakout sessions if possible, for the survey conversation, because I think that way it will it can't replace the in-person, but I think it can make it better. As you know, it's difficult when you're on it. You guys have been on tons of Zoom calls or Teams or Google Meets, whatever, WebEx for the last year. It's a lot harder to get as much participation when you have 25 people on one Zoom call versus we're going to break up into some teams and we're going to put this group in and you're going to rotate in to this group and you're going to talk about question one. We're going to have 4 groups and they're going to report out to us. So then you can dialogue with each other and converse and hear each other's respective perspectives. So we'll see if we can work that out logistically, but I think that will help, because if we were in person, that's what I'd be doing with you. I'd have you broken up into smaller subunits and then reporting out what you thought on a particular topic for information sharing to the group as a whole. And those groups will not be static, you know, if we create those, so we're not locking 5 or 6 people together for the entire time. The groups would rotate from meeting to meeting. So you get to converse with different people and have someone who's the reporter out and then also the note taker to kind of keep your subunit in order.
So I'm kind of, again, I'm sort of monitoring the room here.
Yeah.
So, go ahead, Josh.
Just so I understand correctly, then originally there was some dates that were put out for the compensation committee when we signed up to do this, and 2 of them I believe were full days here. I'm assuming that right now when you're talking the 5th and then late May, we would be kind of redoing the calendar going forward, like you had basically made mention of in your one email to us.
Yes, Josh, thank you for that clarification. The dates that were previously put out were I think really wishful thinking and really did not come to fruition. And so when I just sort of said scrap all those dates and we're going to kind of do the best we can, part of it is slowing down, making sure that we're in the right kind of time and space. And so that's why you may have, some of you may have left the April 5th date on your calendar. We were not talking about summer dates at that point in time. I'm hopeful as you've gotten some information even recently from the district about vaccinations forthcoming. I'm again sitting here with fingers crossed that if we're all, anybody who wants it is vaccinated by the end of this month, that we may get to that place in April and or into the summer where we can meet together and it's less of an issue. We can still mask up and do all the things we're supposed to do, but hopefully feel better about being in a shared space at that point in time in terms of a group of adults working together in collaboration. So I do think, Josh, for now, we don't really have anything locked and loaded, so to speak.
One clarification for the summer thing, Steve, just in anticipation of that email that you're going to send out. I would wholeheartedly agree with you that the in-person thing would work much better than the Zoom fashion if possible. But with people kind of making plans already, would there be a Zoom option potentially if, let's say, somebody is just out of town for that?
Sure. I mean, I think we could accommodate that. We're certainly getting a lot better at it. You know, and I know it's not the same, but I also recognize that somebody might be out of town and say, well, I feel terrible to not be there. I at least want to listen, you know, call in and try to listen. So I think we can certainly try. I know it's hard, but we can certainly make that effort.
Sorry, I have a question.
Yeah, so circling back to not moving back on the pay scale, looking forward, I know a lot of us were planning on moving up in that lane movement to this coming year and had our credits approved. Are we looking at honoring those plans that we've worked towards, or is that something that's just going to be looked at the new compensation in the next year?
It's a good question. I don't want to sound like I'm the kind of judge and jury on this stuff. I'm a piece of it. What I would say is that I would be stunned if our work were to impact next year. So the 21-22 school year. It's coming up fast and furious. We're talking about, you know, some summer conversations, perhaps. I would be stunned if what we're doing would affect next year's pay. Having said that, I also do think that the board makes very difficult conversations every budget cycle. And so I think it's reasonable to think that those things are honored, Brianna. And yet I would also say what we saw this year was that the steps did not happen. But I also don't think it's a fair thing to assume that just because steps didn't happen this year, that the lane movement wouldn't next year. I think that many have made that assumption. I don't know that that's a fair assumption, but that is part of the board's conversation every year when they put their budget forth. But that's a good question. And again, I don't see that the fruits of our labor now are going to be ready to go by fall. I could be wrong, but I don't know if anybody else thinks that, but that would be my thought. And I'm looking at Ruth on my screen because I know how much work it is when we make a change. And we would really need to be done with our work probably by the end of June to make that happen for the start of the school year. So doubt that that's the reality.
Just following up with what Josh said, I'm open to the summer dates, but the sooner that they could be set kind of in stone, or at least kind of there, so that we could make plans for other things, would be great to have. So are you planning, once you send out that survey, are you planning to try and set some summer dates then fairly quickly, or are you planning on waiting a while?
No, thank you, Heather. I do think that was a conversation that Bob and I were planning to have, is that we could isolate those dates, sooner than later, to say, if you can, put a hold, and then they're there. It's a lot easier to cancel things than it is to try to add them later, for sure.
And I don't want to just, and for whatever this is worth, I don't want to dwell on this matter tonight. But Brianna's question and talking about retention and those things, I know there's 3 board members on here. I don't know what can be done before this school year ends / early summer. But the question she asked is a common question that is going to impact the decisions that several people make regarding retention coming into this summer. So I know that right now nobody is prepared to give a hard and fast answer on that, and I don't know when that would necessarily come. But that's a very popular question that she is concerned about right now.
Anything else? I'm just going to give a good long pause before we wrap it up then. All right, then I will just, again, thank you for your time. Want to offer my appreciation to Bob for being with us tonight and presenting. I will forward probably maybe at some point tomorrow, so I can really pull together the things that we've talked about, but the PowerPoint, a little bit of review, little information about April 5th, and maybe even if I can reach Bob, some preliminary dates for summer, just to get those sort of to you. If not, they'll come in little bites along the way. But again, thank you for your preliminary participation in this, for your willingness to be here. Take a look at that PowerPoint if there's anything else in there that draws your attention. Certainly, I know that this will be an ongoing report back by the board members that are here to the full board, and they'll continue that conversation as well. So hearing nothing else, then I can gladly get you out of here 4 minutes early, which is always a good thing. So thank you for your time and attention. Just as kind of a kickoff meeting, folks. Really do appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.